Vamos a iniciar entonces.
We are going to get started then.
Ingresando.
As participants start coming to the webinar, we are going to get started with the presentations. Welcome, my name is Karina Soto. I'm the chief of the National Office of Homelessness in the Chilean government, and I want to welcome all of our colleagues from Europe and Latin America. It's a great honor to be with you here in this webinar called Housing First to Overcome Homelessness. This is possible due to the valuable collaboration of the European Union program EUROsociAL Plus, among other stakeholders of the Red Calle from Latin America that are here with us. As we all know, homeless people is growing substantially in the middle of this global crisis. Social differences have deepened in the context of the pandemic situation, specifically in our region. And this is forcing us to work to provide decent and efficient solutions for the homeless people from our governments, civil society organization, and all the key stakeholders in the housing sector. Housing First is a long-term policy that allows several communities to eradicate homelessness. And what should be better than a community that is committed to eradication of the homelessness, with representatives of different organizations and governments to share experiences, learnings, and opportunities to enhance this topic. First of all, I want to welcome our speakers, the Dr. Sam Samlis, Professor Balakrishna Rajagopal, Mr. Ricardo Rio, and also Andrea Vagilares. I also want to welcome Mr. Goodfunker from the delegation of the European Union in Chile, also Lydia Stazen, who is the executive director of the Institute Global Homelessness, also Carlos Marambio Morel, the chief of the political housing of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Planification of Chile government, Fernanda Auersberg, National Director of the Social Development Ministry of Uruguayan government, and also Paulo from the shelter, also Andres Buñar, Technical Director of People in Homeless Situation from a foundation in Chile, and especially the representatives of our Latin American network, Adriana Riveri, coordinator of the program for homeless people from the Social Inclusion Secretariat, and Vanessa Weinstein, director of the International Affairs of the Social Development Ministry in Argentina. I also want to welcome Mariana Neres, National Secretary of the Ministry of Women, Family and Human Rights from the Brazilian government. Also, Marta Canelo, coordinator of Integrated Management Group of Health Ministry in Colombia, and also especially Francisco Delgado, Vice Minister of Human Development and Social Inclusion Ministry from Costa Rica. Also, Estefania Jurado, Secretary of Social Protection, and Cristobal Carrillo, Director of International Operations of Inclusion, Economic and Socially of Ecuador government. Also, Jorge Amarisha, Chief of Urgent Response Disposals for homelessness people in the Paraguayan government, and especially all the organizations of civil society and local governments that are here with us, and some homeless people that are also a part of our program. I want to welcome you all very warmly. And in order to start, I want to call EUROsociAL Center, the chief of the European delegation in Chile. Welcome. Thank you very much, Karina. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to share here with you these opportunities. And I am very pleased to be here in this webinar in the framework of a following up action of the European program EUROsociAL Plus to the Social Development Ministry and the action for the installation of a new national strategy oriented to overcome homelessness through the implementation of Housing First model. European Union wants to contribute to the Chilean process and a specific request of our Chilean partners defined through this program, EUROsociAL Plus, a roadmap to follow up this process. And we are collaborating with several stakeholders of the political, academic, and social spectrum in these initiatives. And right now, we are launching a debate cycle with different universities about this process with the participation of the Vice President of the European Commission, that is also the president of the Commission for the Future of Europe. And one of the main topics of this debate, this discussion, has to do with social rights. In our case, as European Union, social rights are mainly a competence of the member states, also the organizations of the European Union that are providing guidelines for this efforts, for this work. And in this context, a couple of weeks ago, the authorities of the European governments reunited in a summit in Oporto provides support for social rights actions. And this pillar is a gathering of 20 principles in which all the 27 member countries will converge in their politics as well. One of them is the right to housing and assistance for people without a home. From European Union, we are providing support for different actions. In some months, we will implement a platform to help homeless people trying to the governments, cities, services suppliers to exchange best practices and identify the focus to provide efficient solution. As you may know, in the European Union, we are assuring the principle of housing first based on best practices of some member states to reduce substantially the percentage of homeless people. And also the impact on human, the lack of housing, this orientation that based as well to the very high costs that are included in the approach of helping homeless people associated with social expenses and health expenses. And this framework is key to highlight the need of collaboration and exchange among local governments and states due to best practices. This cooperation modality to the internal part of the European Union is the same that we are implementing outside our region. And through the program EUROsociAL Plus, we wanted to be allies of this important process that is developed in Chile to define and work and escalate the public policy with people, with homeless people, a policy that is based on the approach of housing first as well. With the support of this cooperation, we were able to recreate and adapt to the Chilean context the developed tools by the European organizations with the long trajectory on the implementation of housing first model that awakened the interest of other countries in the region, such as Brazil and Uruguay, members of Red Calle in Latin America, which the European Union provided support through the program Adelante. In order to finish, I want to congratulate all of you because of the achievements, and it's a great pleasure to contribute with the exchange of learnings, and I hope that our experience ends up with the best outcomes, reaching and showing innovations that are useful in the European context and other Latin American countries. Thank you very much. Thank you, EUROsociAL. And now I want to welcome Lydia Stason. She's the Executive Director of Institute Global Homelessness. Welcome, Lydia.
Muchas gracias, Karina.
Thank you very much,
Buenos
Karina.
días a todos y todas.
Good morning, everyone.
That's all the Spanish that I know, so I will be switching to English. If you need translation, you can click the interpretation button and hear my remarks in Spanish. It is wonderful to be with almost 400 people on the webinar today talking about the issue of homelessness. One thing that we have seen in our work around the world at the Institute of Global Homelessness is that the themes and the challenges and the problems are more similar than we are different. And so one of the things that we love to do at the Institute
Las
of Global
cosas que nos encanta hacer en el Instituto Global de Sinhogarismo es conectar diferentes culturas, diferentes países.
We can build a global movement of people who are working very hard on this issue that affects all of our countries, that affects all of us. The Institute of Global Homelessness is based in Chicago, Illinois, and we work in more than 7 countries around the world in 13 different communities, including in Santiago with Karina and her team, and in Montevideo, Uruguay with Yanela and her team. And we have learned so much from these different communities in terms of how you all are working to address homelessness, and we're able to take those learnings to our other communities where we work in Croatia, in India, in the United Kingdom, and in the United States. And also our colleagues in Australia. There's much richness that we can learn together. And we've also been working with Dr. Sam Semberis, who was, really the founder of the Housing First model, and being able to connect him with our communities has brought some interesting learning as well. We also have been working very closely with different colleagues at the United Nations. And last February, in February of 2020, the first resolution on homelessness was issued by a United Nations commission. And in that resolution, it connects the importance of addressing homelessness to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We will not be able to end poverty if we do not also address homelessness. We will not be able to have sustainable cities if we do not also address homelessness. And this resolution clearly
El problema del sinhogarismo. Y esta resolución conecta claramente esto, que debería ser una temática que nos preocupe a todos, que tengamos la posibilidad de crear un mundo más apropiado para todos. Entonces, en base a esa resolución, el instituto
to continue to think about how do we define homelessness globally, how do we measure homelessness globally, and how do we work together to spread homeless interventions so that less and less people experience homelessness over time. And so we welcome this conversation with you all today. We would like for your involvement with IGH. We'll put the website in the chat if you're interested in learning more about what we do and connecting with us, because we would love to continue to spread the information about how we address homelessness together between us all. So thank you very much. I look forward to the conversation today.
Thank you very much, Lydia. And now I want to welcome as well Fernanda Auersberg, National Director of Social Protection in the Social Development Ministry in the Uruguayan government. We have been working very closely. Welcome, Fernanda. Thank you, Karina. Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon for those of you who are in a different time zone. Dear Andrea Vagilares, Subsecretary of Social Development and Family from Chile, Edward Sanker, Co-Representative of the European Delegation in Chile, dear Karina Soto, Chief of the National Office of Homelessness in Chile, and other colleagues of the institutions that are part of Red Calle in Latin America. I want to compliment you all, and especially the speakers that are here with us today. And as well, I want to welcome all the participants, more than 400 participants that are following up this event, connected from different places, from the Social Development Ministry of Uruguay and from Red Calle. We are celebrating, we want to congratulate, and we want to thank especially the Chilean government for the organization of this webinar and for inviting us to be a part of this. Without any doubts, this will be a space to reflect that will allow us to know the achievements and the learnings of the implementation of Housing First program and adaptation of this model in other countries that seem to be something very far away for the Latin American realities. In this same sense, and following the Chile steps, this is a reality in Uruguay today. We want to share with you that our government is working in the diversification of the effort to provide attention and services to homeless people. And we are working on new responses focused on housing. Today, we have 135 people that are already a part of our program, Housing with Support, that started in the beginning of this year. Our goal is that for the first period of 2022, we want to have 300 people under the scope of this new program. So this is a very important moment for all of us. And I also want to take the most out of this moment to express my gratitude to the European Union and specifically the EUROsociAL Plus program, also the Institute of Global Homelessness, who are and have been strategical partners through this path, helping us to focus on the agenda of homelessness, making us closer to research and the experiences of Housing First in developed countries. Thanks to this work, we now have a space of working in a regional level with governments of Brazil, Chile, Costa Rica, Colombia, Argentina, Ecuador, Paraguay, and Uruguay that allow us to foster and promote the innovations in public policy with the goal of the commitment to eradicate homelessness in the framework of 2030 agenda. Nobody should be left behind. I wish you success, and we rely on the sustainability of the achievements that the Housing First program in Chile achieved, that will for sure potentiate it since the commitment and the solidarity of more public stakeholders and civil society. Thank you very much. Thank you, Fernanda. And now I want to introduce someone very special. It's Carlo Marambio, is the chief of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Planification in Chile, and he is the one who opened the doors so we can begin with this experience. Welcome, Carlos. Thank you very much, Karina and Rocio. With several stakeholders that are specific
técnica y sobre todo también corazón, hay que también recalcarlo en conjunto.
for this project. We need to highlight this because we are working all together to provide a solution to these homeless families. It was a very well coordinated job among all the stakeholders. And I want to highlight as well that this open world without borders that allows migration dynamically, and in the cities we can move from one place to another, and this also allows us to share best practices and the work we just did with the Social Development Ministry, seeking for best solutions, best practices outside in other countries and adapt them to the Latin American reality, because this is not a problem only in Chile, this is a problem everywhere, and we are approaching this with initiatives that succeed in other countries. And of course, it's hard at the beginning, we have no doubt about this, but the outcome is something that we will see in this webinar. And I also want to point out that this was a change for all these homeless families now, and this is something amazing because of all the tools that we have. So I want to celebrate this webinar, and I want to express my gratitude to Social Development Ministry, and I am here representing the Minister Felipe Ware and the Secretary of the Housing Ministry, because this is an urgent initiative in Chile today and in all over the world. Thank you very much, Carlos. Now we will have our speaking panel. I want to remember two practical details in your screens. In the bottom part on the right, you will find an icon, an image that will allow all of you that wants to listen this webinar in Spanish or in English to select the language channel with the interpretation. And apart from that, we have the chat here to gather all the questions, all the comments, and our organizational team will review everything and share it at the end of the panel to have the Q&A session. First of all, I want to welcome some summaries. It's a great pleasure for me to have you here and welcome you as well to this community that work with all your learnings, pathways to housing. I understand that you have been working since 1992 in New York City, where you founded for the first time. We know that you developed the Housing First model with the convincement of housing is a human right. And this is the commitment that you share with several countries all over the world. Currently, we know that you are taking part in several research to enhance the solutions, and in order that the street is not a reality for thousands of human beings. So welcome, very warming with a Latin American hug that we are also preparing this program. I want to remind you all that Sam will present Housing First model today. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you very much, Karina. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be with you. I'm so pleased to see the involvement of so many countries addressing this issue. So, and congratulations on organizing such a well-developed and well-attended webinar. My lead off is to try and, because we're going to be talking about homelessness for the duration, I want to lay the groundwork, some definitions, you know, what homelessness is, how it comes about, and especially since we're going to be talking about housing first as an intervention, I want to explain as clearly as possible what the Housing First program is and what the Housing First approach is, so that we're all using the same language and meaning the same thing. I have some slides that I'd like to present, and I'm going to share my screen here. Now, are the slides visible? Is it, everyone can see the slides?
Yes.
Everything is good? Okay. So,
Sí.
okay. So now, let me just start off by saying what my agenda is for this presentation. I want to give you two definitions of homelessness. One is the macro level definition, the social and economic definition of how homelessness comes about. The other definition is the individual level definition, how many places and many countries, many programs see homelessness as a function of an individual problem. Those are two different kinds of definitions, and they result in different kinds of solutions to the problem. And then I'm going to tell you about how Housing First addresses homelessness. I'm going to give you a brief summary of research evidence, because I want you to know that what I'm presenting is in part developed from theory and developed from working directly with people who are homeless. Really, it's an intervention that was developed from the streets up to government, not an intervention that was developed by government and down to the streets. And I think that's important because I believe that because it was developed by the users of the program, I attribute that to one of the successes of the program, that it was informed by the people who will be using it, who knew the lived experience. So I'm going to talk to you about the effectiveness of it, because I think that without research evidence, we can have debates about all kinds of things, and then it becomes one person's opinion over another. So it's key as we move forward in addressing these issues that evidence has to be part of every one of our interventions to know that we're on the right track. And then finally, just a few lessons learned about Housing First recently, especially in this moment of the pandemic that we're undergoing, because that has definitely brought some new interventions and new ways of thinking about homelessness that we didn't have before. So let me start with this sort of global perspective on homelessness. You know, most countries in the Southern Hemisphere, and this is it's a great move forward that South America, Latin America, India are beginning to address homelessness. Even defining a problem is a beginning of an intervention. So, you know, I think that that we're working on a global definition. The United Nations meeting that Linda referenced earlier, to have all of the countries thinking about, are we going to address this issue and how are we going to address it, is a great start. We already know a few things about homelessness worldwide, at least in the countries that have been looking at this for a number of years. Some of them, for, you know, in the States where homelessness started, really this epidemic of homelessness, you know, over almost 40 years ago now. So this map tells you two things. One, the color scheme of the map tells you the income disparity in each nation. So income disparity, the difference between the richest and the poorest people in the country, is measured by something called the Gini coefficient, G-I-N-I, Gini index. And this data was taken from the World Bank. The Gini coefficient measures income disparity, and the numbers that you see in the countries, Canada 33, United States 41, Brazil 41, Chile, Argentina, many of the South American countries are around 40. The range of the score goes from 0, which means there is no difference between rich and poor. Nobody has 0. But the lower the number, the less disparity, and the higher the number, the more disparity. So you see the countries that have the less disparity between rich and poor are the Scandinavian countries up there, around 30. Spain, Portugal around 35, and Russia, China 38. So why is this important? Well, it turns out that homelessness, the number of people in a country that are homeless, is directly related to the Gini index of that country. The more disparity you have rich and poor, between rich and poor, the more people that are counted as homeless in that country. Not only that, but the fewer services, the mental health, social housing, addiction treatment services are also related to the Gini. Higher Gini, fewer social services. So when we think about homelessness from this perspective, you can see that the larger political and economic forces are creating homelessness that we end up seeing as individuals on the street, but there's much more in the background than just that. Seeing the person on the street, like this man sitting on top of the iceberg, this is my effort of an image of like, what are we missing? When we see someone who's homeless on the street, we are not seeing the neoliberal capitalist policies that have privatized and created income disparity over the last 30 years, 40 years, a mental health system that discharges people to hospital without a housing plan, a criminal justice system that isn't looking at rehabilitation or thinking about what happens to the person after release from jail, an educational system that tends to neglect young students who are struggling and end up leaving school instead of having additional support to complete, wages not being sufficient to pay for rents, or as rents are increasing, and national housing policies that do not take into account that there will be a need for some subsidy, some social housing or community housing or subsidized housing. And so you have this continuous gap between affordability and wages. These larger system failures end up not being talked about because everyone starts to focus on the person and how do we fix this person? And we tend to ignore that the production system that creates homelessness every day still continues to produce homelessness at a much faster rate, at least in most countries, than we're ending it. So, if we're going to talk really seriously about ending homelessness, we're going to have to talk a lot more than just about the people who are on the street today. I mean, yes, we can start with that, but I just want that to be understood in terms of the larger context and background. One of the other things about homelessness is that it's defined very differently in different countries. In the United States, where I work a lot, you have to be homeless for like 6 months continuously or 3 times over the last 2 years, something called chronic homelessness. And that will give you benefits. The government will only address people who are most urgent in need. So if you are at risk for homelessness, you're staying with friends or family and moving from place to place, or you're somehow not visible on the street, you're not likely to be counted as homeless. Whereas if you go to, in South America, for example, many of the people who are living in less than adequate housing in these structures, shanty towns, are not counted as homeless because they have a roof over their head. So in this typology that was introduced by the European group called Fianza, you see that homelessness is for some people defined only as those without a roof over their heads. Other homelessness is defined for people who don't have a place to stay at a regular basis. They're in a shelter or an institution, or they're living in insecure housing. So that there are different ways to define homelessness and to include people needing intervention. If you move all the way up to the Scandinavian countries, if your lease is not signed and you only have 2 more months on your lease, someone is likely to contact you and say, is there a problem? You are at risk for not renewing your lease. So the threshold, the trigger for what, you know, is the intervention really has quite a range across the different countries. Most countries have this kind of, you know, bipolar approach to homelessness. One is, you know, kindness and compassion, and, you know, most of the people on this call are on this side of like, how do we help homeless people? But there's also an approach that is the policing approach to homelessness, and there are laws and police interventions about getting people off the streets, out of business districts, arresting people who are violating really small violations of public disturbances and end up in jail. So there's, and this varies country by country and state by state. And it's very much based on the values of the community and how we're going to address homelessness. The most countries have a priority group that they focus on. For some, it's families with young children. For others, it's people who are going in and out of hospital or in and out of jail. For others, it's those that have been homeless longest. Recently, you know, in the last year and a half, we have seen the prioritization of people who are anywhere on the street or living in crowded shelters because of the pandemic, and we wanted to do something about that. So the priority is nothing fixed. It's determined by the political, cultural, and environmental conditions at the moment. Most of our homeless policy is focused on people who are on the street, and it represents only a small number of the overall homeless population. Most people who are homeless are invisible. They're staying with relatives or staying in their cars. They're staying in places where they're not seen. And what is seen and most often becomes of public concern and therefore public policy are the people on the street. The people that we see every day that look like they're struggling with addiction or mental illness. They're going in and out of the emergency room. And this is the group that gets a tremendous amount of attention. And the entire system of homeless services in most of the countries that have a robust homeless service system, it looks to serve these individuals. And the approach is not the system approach that I'm describing. They're not looking to improve the jail system or the hospital system. They're looking to improve the individual so that they can be better prepared to move into housing. This often called a staircase approach assumes that people need to be sober, they need to be in treatment, they need to have motivation to get their lives together, that somehow their homelessness has been caused by a character flaw, poor decision-making, maybe laziness, in some way, addiction, but a personal failure rather than a systemic failure. And I think that is in part political. I think in part it exonerates government and public policy from taking ownership of the structural problems that contribute to homelessness. Because after all, most people with mental illness and addiction are not homeless. Most people who have addiction actually are working and able to hold a job. They're functional in their addiction. Other people with mental illness who have family and support are doing fine, living with their families, getting treatment and support. So there's nothing about mental illness and addiction that creates homelessness. The reason we see more people who are homeless with mental illness and addiction is because this group does not have the resources that's available to others groups. You know, if you think about the population of any country, most people with addiction and mental illness are not on the street. In fact, they are housed and managing somehow. So it's something about homelessness and poverty without resources that's creating this visible group. And once that group is on the street, it's very, very difficult for them to exit. So Housing First was designed initially for this group. It was designed initially for the group that was most visible and on the streets and we didn't know what to do with. And in order for us to develop Housing First, and this is important as an approach, because I don't see Housing First as a solution to homelessness. I mean, it is a solution to homelessness, but ending homelessness is only a first step. Housing First really was developed out of a psychiatric rehabilitation philosophy. It was developed first on the basis that everyone should have a place to live, housing as a basic human right, that people shouldn't have to earn it by being sober, by participating in treatment or in other ways, but also that we were concerned about what happens to the person after they're housed. We believed that everyone wants to get better with the right supports they can. We had a belief that people do not require the kind of institutional care that has been given to them over the years. They had a right to decide their own plans, determine their own life. It's a support of the inclusion of people with mental illness and other challenges who have typically been excluded or institutionalized in society. It's really more about the inclusion than it is about the ending homelessness. It happens to end homelessness on the way to that, but the goal is much broader. It's really wanting to change the way people with mental illness or addiction are perceived and how they're treated in society and how they're included in society. So the first thing I think, and everybody knows this about Housing First, is that there is no pre-treatment, no requirements. The program is driven by the client's most urgent need. And most clients who are homeless will say that the most important thing I want is a place to live. So this jumps over any need for preparatory programs, shelters, transitional housing, all of that. It goes from the street right to home. Now, for countries that do not have a well-developed, homeless industrial business, because it is a very big business, and all of these transitional programs are very expensive because of the constant supervision and so on. So there is financial consequences to this. If you have not in your country already set up a big system to get people ready for housing, you can save a lot of money and time and failed programming by going directly to a Housing First approach and focus on investing all of your resources to permanent housing with support services rather than in other kinds of program investments. Even when you have a shelter system and transitional housing, this is where a Housing First approach comes in. For those people that are in the shelter and can't get out in a matter of 2 weeks or 3 weeks, they should be referred immediately to a housing program. Otherwise, they end up staying in the shelter or the transitional housing for years at times. So people from the streets go into housing, and also people in transitional and other housing where they're not moving also move into housing. So you have the whole system focused on ending homelessness as quickly as possible. I would say that is the Housing First approach. The Housing First program is that program that has housing resources and staff and actually provides the service. So you can have both a program that does that and an approach system-wide that points in that direction. For the program, you need three really components. You need a rent subsidy. You need either cash or a government voucher or some way to be able to pay for people's housing. People are poor and they're not going to have a job anytime soon. Some may, but people need to be housed, and that requires cash. Some countries have built housing. The quickest way to do it is to work in partnership with community landlords and to rent housing with a subsidy. And that's step one. You also need a robust social service staff, which is support services after people are housed, and an approach to working with people that continues to allow them the dignity of making their own choices. People in these programs have a lease, and they are required to pay 30% of their income towards rent if they have it. And this is very important, they need to agree to have a visit by the program staff to make sure they're okay. Housing First works very well because there's money for rent, and there's also staff that follow up to make sure the person is doing well. That's the program. So the immediate access ends homelessness, but the real goal is recovery. I'm Greek, so I think in these metaphors of, the ancient Greeks. The Trojan horse to me is a metaphor for what Housing First is about. It's you introduce Housing First in a community and you say, look, this program is going to take care of people who are on the street. I guarantee you, if you introduce a Housing First program and you do it well, you will end homelessness for 80% of the people who are on the street, if you have the resources to do it. But what you're really doing, that's the way you get in the gate. But once you're in the gate, what you want to do is change the mental health system, the criminal justice system, the housing policy system that is creating homelessness, because you're demonstrating with that pilot that, look, we can get these people off the street. Now, if we want to get everybody off the street, this is what we have to do it. So initially, it's about helping the vulnerable individual, but really the goal is systems change. We want to go from streets or shelter. That's the key to the psychiatric hospital where I started working about 40 years ago. They had, kept people locked up, and then the key to jail. And you want to go from all of those different keys, you want to go to having the person have the key to their own apartment in their hand. That's the image. The program has there's a program manual about how to operate it. Nobody gets discharged from this program, by the way. It's not a program that punishes or kicks people out. It's a program that is very committed to helping each person. Even if they lose an apartment, we stay with them, and we stay with them again. If they go to jail, we stay with them. It's very, very hard once you're admitted to a Housing First program to lose us. You have to commit to people long-term, for as long as they need you, in order to help people along the way. So that's another key component of it. But I'm just laying out the principles and letting you know that they're general enough they can be applied across many different countries, as they have. Housing First is in about 30 or 40 countries today. And these principles are general enough that they can be adapted locally so that they make sense. The program, like I said, you need to be studying it. We started doing research on it right from the beginning. This is the results of a study of a randomized controlled trial. This is the first study. We did this in New York in about 1997, 98, and published the results a few years later. The purple line shows you the staircase model. Everybody started from the street, baseline. The groups were exactly the same number of years homeless, same mental health problems, same addiction problems. 3 years later, you'll see that in the first 12 months, we housed on the blue line, the Housing First group was housed and stayed housed. And it took almost 3 years for the staircase model to get to 40%. The Housing First model was successful 80% of the time in terms of keeping people stably housed. So it's that's not a small effect, that's a huge effect. there have been many other randomized controlled trials, which is the highest scientific standard for research. This is a graphic of Canada. They spent $110 million doing a Housing First national study in these 5 cities over a 2-year period. It was a 5-year study, and they got the same results as we did. That top graph is the Housing First group, and then the staircase group below. So we see that the staircase model really works for about 30 or 40% of the people in terms of getting them housed anytime soon. Over the years, 10 years, these are only 24 months, maybe in 10 years they catch up, but they're not catching up anytime soon. And you have people housed for a long period of time before that using this approach. And when they're housed, remember, they're not going to jail, they're not going to hospital. So there's a cost offset to getting people housed as well. That's built into the study. It cost, according to the Canadian study, where they had over 2,000 people in the sample, it cost no more to house someone than to keep them homeless. This is the United States housed veterans. They have 70 cities where there are no more homeless veterans on the street using Housing First. I'm just going to tell you about a one country comparison because I know I'm running out of time. If I'm not out of time already, but just need another 3 or 4 minutes to tell you this, because I think there's a great lesson here that was learned recently by comparing what happened in Finland and what happened in Ireland with this Housing First approach. And this was a 10-year study that was looked at by Owen O'Sullivan at Trinity College in Dublin. Now, the reason that we're looking at Ireland and Finland is they're both relatively small countries. The population is around 5 million each, and about a third of the population lives in one major city, either in Dublin or Helsinki. Now, in the period they looked at was 2008, because 2008 is when both of these countries, it was the EU, decided they were going to use a Housing First approach. And both of them committed to using Housing First for the next 10 years to end homelessness. At that time, Ireland had 600 shelter beds and Finland had 2,100 shelter beds. Their homeless population was about the same. What happened after they started is that the financial crisis of 2008 started at that same time, soon after. And the Irish government decided there were so many people on the street that we have to build more shelter. There was a lot of public pressure to get homeless people off the street. And so in Ireland, they began to build more and more shelters. They went from 600 shelters to over 2,000 shelter beds. But the Finns, they stuck to their guns and they began to change the shelters into apartments, just like we're doing now with the hotels, changing them into apartments, with COVID. But they stayed with the program. So after 10 years, the Finns had went from having 1,200 people homeless to more than 5,000 people homeless. More shelters, more people in shelters, more people housing. Nobody was getting housed. And the Finns went from having 3,000 people homeless down to 1,000 in 2016. And today in Finland, there's only one shelter in Helsinki with 52 beds. This was a multi-year program and a commitment to a policy and an approach. And that's the kind of commitment that you need, not to move into a Housing First approach that is consistent, and you have to do it with some degree of fidelity to the model so that you can achieve these results. The Housing First approach has been used in indigenous cultures and Maori cultures, easily adapted to those kind of collectivist approaches. During the pandemic, we saw an unprecedented number of people moving directly from the streets into hotels or motels that were empty because of the business, ending. So there were vacant hotels, and they, I have to say, I have been working, trying to persuade governments for 30 years to get people off the streets and into hotels. And I've had some success there. But this little virus, COVID-19, came along, and in 1 year persuaded governments to move people from shelters and from the streets into housing, thousands and thousands of people at the time. So because they recognize that being unhealthy is on the street and in crowded conditions was not the way to go. So there's a lot of action in what looks like housing with support. There's a question about what's going to happen once the pandemic is over, and is there going to be enough housing for people? But that's a crisis that we're facing. But I think it's an important lesson that governments are investing in converting now hotels that have gone out of business into permanent housing. It's an opportunity here that really is at hand. In the current conditions. In California alone, they've just invested $7 billion in hotel conversion. So there's going to be a lot of new housing converting this hotel motel conversions to housing. So that's I'll just leave you with this 5 points summary. Just that everything I've said. If you're going to do this, if you're going to want to address homelessness effectively, I would say these are 5 key takeaways. Select a program model that's based on evidence and looks to systems change, not just individual change. Develop a community-wide or national vision that's adopted by government, NGOs, and advocates. You all have to be on the same page. Develop a multi-year plan that has measurable outcomes and a timeline. You got to know where you are relative to your goal. Invest in training and program fidelity so that you're staying on course and you're doing the program right. Evaluate what you're doing and make adjustments as needed. Everything has to be adapted to your context. So use the principles, evaluate and make adjustments, and plan to go to scale, and also think about the prevention, because if you're taking people off the street and you're not thinking about prevention, there'll be more people coming into homelessness all the time. So that's my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Muchísimas gracias, Sam, por esta presentación que resume tu experiencia, la evidencia y también tu pasión por este tema.
Thank you very much for your speech. You have been able to explain an excellent situation. I want to remember all of you that we have a chat through which you can ask your questions. And to go on, I want to welcome to next speaker, Professor Balakrishnan. He studied law at the India University. He's an expert in law, international law. He has a PhD in these matters, and he's going to talk about the right to housing. He's the founder of an association dealing with these topics. He has taken part in different actions, plans regarding these land, property, living rights. He will talk about house rights in a pandemic situation. I give you the floor to you. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. I would like to thank the Chilean Ministry of Social Development and Family for their invitation to speak at this important event, which is supported by the European Union program EUROsociAL, and which brings together experts from Chile and Latin America. Congrats to the Chilean government for organizing this well-attended event. The COVID-19 pandemic has underlined how important it is that everyone has access to an adequate and decent home to allow for physical distancing and be sheltered against the virus. This has highlighted the issue of homelessness once again, but as a matter of life and death. Homelessness is a global human rights concern, not only in Chile and Latin America. Regrettably, in the majority of advanced economies, homelessness has increased over the last 2 decades, if it is all seriously counted by statistical offices. There are only a few countries that have managed to prevent and reduce homelessness successfully. Finland, as was mentioned, is one of those countries that has been able to nearly eliminate homelessness thanks to a version of a housing first approach. There is no globally agreed upon definition of homelessness yet, and many advanced economies differ significantly in how they understand it, whether they include rough sleepers or those only in institutionalized settings, for example. In many developed countries, homelessness coincides with the lack of tenure security, including those who live in informal settlements. Thus, instead of thinking about homelessness as a condition, as an on-off switch, it is better to think of it as a continuum, a spectrum that runs the gamut from street homelessness to varieties of insecure housing, including camps, transit housing, and other temporary shelters, all the way to informal settlements, with the issue of lack of tenure security being at the core of it, along with assaults on dignity and humane living. Homelessness is one of the most severe violations of the right to adequate housing enshrined in Article 11 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. This covenant, binding on Chile, as well as on nearly all Latin American countries, imposes clear legal obligations on public administration and private actors at national, regional, and local levels to prevent, address, and eliminate homelessness as far as possible. Having no home at all to live in case of street homelessness, or having only temporary emergency accommodation in a shelter does not satisfy the minimum obligation of states to ensure that everyone can at least enjoy a minimum standard of living and a life in dignity. Homelessness is closely associated with other human rights violations. Living on the street means actually a reduction of life expectation, which is nowadays in most countries above 70 years, to an average of only around 42 years, as studies in France have shown. Homelessness is thus not only a violation of the right to adequate living, it also contributes to other violations of human rights, such as the right to the highest attainable standard of health and the right to life itself. This issue has only recently been highlighted by the UN Human Rights Committee when it adopted 2 years ago a general comment on the right to life, which underlines that states have obligations to address systemic issues that result in loss of life, including, for example, homelessness. Vulnerable groups such as LGBTQ communities and migrant workers are more likely to be homeless in many countries, and the support systems in place often do not account for the special challenges that they face. Persons in situations of homelessness who lack an official address are furthermore often discriminatorily excluded from social and other benefits, more likely to be victims of crime or assault, and unfortunately, in many countries, also subjected to disproportionate and unlawful use of force by law enforcement officials or private security officers. In many countries, there are still laws and regulations at national or local levels that prohibit begging, eating, or sleeping in public places, criminalizing people living in extreme poverty and homelessness. Evidence shows that such criminalization can make homelessness worse. The United Nations Human Rights Council has adopted several resolutions calling upon states to end the criminalization of homelessness. In June 2020, the Human Rights Council called in Resolution 43/14 on states to, quote, take all measures necessary to eliminate legislation that criminalize homelessness and to take positive measures with a view to prevent and eliminate homelessness by adoption and implementing laws administrative orders, cross-sectional strategies and programs at all levels that are, among others, gender, age, and disability responsive and based on international human rights law. End of quote. International human rights standards and rulings of other regional human rights mechanisms are fully supportive of this. For example, the UN Guiding Principles on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights underlines that states should repeal and reform any laws that criminalize life-sustaining activities in public spaces, such as sleeping, begging, eating, or performing personal hygiene activities. Similarly, the guidelines for the implementation of the right to adequate housing, issued last year by my predecessor, specifies that states should prohibit and address discrimination on the ground of homelessness or other housing status and repeal all laws and measures that criminalize and penalize homeless people or behavior associated with being homeless, such as sleeping or eating in public spaces. The forced eviction of homeless persons from public spaces and the destruction of their personal belongings must be prohibited. Homeless persons should be equally protected from interference with privacy and the home wherever they are living. I would also like to recall that the Committee on the Rights of the Child has established in its General Comment number 21 in 2017 detailed recommendations for safeguarding the rights of children in street situations, including on the issue of criminalization of homelessness of children and aggressive policies to tackle homelessness without respect for human rights. If one disregards mass evictions or forced population transfers, hardly any state or government intentionally wants to produce homelessness. Hardly any state is proud to have people living in homelessness in their country. Actually, 5 years ago, all states recommitted themselves to work towards eliminating homelessness by 2030 when they adopted the UN Agenda for Sustainable Development. Sustainable Development Goal 11.1, which says explicitly that states want to ensure by 2030 access for all to adequate, safe, and affordable housing and basic services. This also implies eliminating homelessness as far as possible, as living in homelessness can be very obviously neither be considered adequate or safe. I'm therefore delighted to see this meeting on Housing First, organized by the government of Chile. It underlines the intention to seriously address the issue of homelessness in Chile. My predecessor Leilani Farha visited Chile in April 2017, and one of the key recommendations made by her to the central government was to prevent, address, and eliminate homelessness through a comprehensive human rights-based housing strategy, improve the protection of renters in the housing market, and work towards regularization of informal settlements. I hope this meeting is one step as well to work towards implementation of these recommendations. In my view, effective strategies to eliminate homelessness can only be developed jointly by state agencies in consultation with civil society organizations and persons living in homelessness. They also need to be tailored to the particularities of each country and not only focus on response measures. Policy responses should put similar emphasis on eliminating the reasons and root causes that produce homelessness, such as forced evictions, internal displacement, unavailability or unaffordability of housing, inadequate drug abuse prevention, or mental health care. Strategies to prevent and address homelessness need furthermore to ensure that children released from public or foster care or people released from prisons or psychiatric care are not released into homelessness. Among young people, LGBTQ persons are at elevated risks of homelessness, as I mentioned already. I have therefore supported the social media campaign of the Office of the Commission, the Human Rights Council, and Free and Equal UN that stresses that everyone deserves a safe and loving home, LGBTQ plus included. My predecessor, Leilani Farha, has underlined in a thematic report on homelessness and human rights that a comprehensive understanding and definition of homelessness is necessary, going beyond narrow definitions of homelessness that would reduce homelessness, for example, to just street homelessness. The ethos typology developed by Fianza in Europe, as was already mentioned, as well as the typology developed by the Institute of Global Homelessness, reflects such a comprehensive understanding of homelessness, covering people without accommodation, people living in temporary or crisis accommodations, like, for example, in camps, reception centers for refugees, and people living in severely inadequate and insecure housing. For example, people sharing their housing with friends in overcrowded conditions, etc. Rough sleeping is thus only one manifestation of homelessness, but not necessarily the most frequent one. Monitoring homelessness through the publication of data is very important and an important step to enable states to meet their obligations under international human rights law. This has also been reiterated in 2020 by the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations, which called in its resolution 2020/7 on all member states, among others, to collect and harmonize the use of disaggregated data on demographics related to homelessness to enable policymaking and to combat discrimination and negative stereotypes against people experiencing homelessness. In my report to the UN General Assembly on COVID-19 and the right to housing last fall, I reiterated the importance of disaggregated data on homelessness and every other dimension of housing in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has disproportionately affected marginalized and vulnerable communities. Let me now finally, in this context, say a few words on housing first. I would like to highlight why, in my view, the housing first approach to homelessness can be an effective approach, but also one called for from a human rights point of view. The idea of housing first is to enable persons that need significant assistance to end homelessness rapidly. Housing should be the starting point rather than an end goal, meaning a radical break from the staircase model, as was mentioned already, to address homelessness, where homeless persons have to pass through many stages, from emergency accommodation to the street to mental health counseling and institutions, back to the streets to the correctional service, and then potentially qualify for an institution providing housing if social assistance laws allow it. Regrettably, the track record of this conventional dominant model in many countries is anything but great. And often the staircase model is backward rather than forward, and we don't see progress towards the goal of ending homelessness. Persons with the greatest need don't seem served, and because of limits on how long the services were provided for, individuals had to move. The goal of housing can be getting persons in situation of homelessness quickly into an ordinary home with security of tenure and provide additional social, legal, and health supports as individually needed. The most important principle of housing first is that housing is a human right and that nobody has to earn through their own behavior to be good enough for housing. Housing first thus respects the human dignity of persons in situations of homelessness by giving them back choice and control on the services they need. In addition, housing is provided independently from support services. No one is kicked out of his or her apartment if she or he stops to take part in the program, and security of tenure is just independently assured. You do not have to leave your home because medical treatment has stopped or social support services have ended. If individuals are required to have a job or income prior to admission, if they have to be, quote, clean and sober prior to admission, and if tenants can be evicted for not following through on their services and or their treatment plan, then it is not a housing first program. It is thus obvious that compared to many other attempts to address homelessness, Housing First has tried to integrate the right to adequate housing at its core. Housing First approaches could also be more effective and also more sustainable from a financial perspective for states. And these dimensions must be continuously studied and evaluated by researchers. Finally, examples of countries like Finland, as has been mentioned already, have shown that it is actually possible to nearly eliminate chronic homelessness by adopting a possible housing first approach. Eradicating homelessness is not wishful thinking of well-meaning human rights experts, of philanthropic idealists, or some social workers. It is actually possible for states and public authorities to eradicate homelessness if they live up to their human rights obligations and make this a priority, which greatly benefits everyone. A human rights-based response to homelessness must, of course, go beyond housing first. Housing First as an approach is focused on individuals that find themselves already in homelessness and usually have multiple severe issues and problems. As I already mentioned, in the first place, homelessness needs to be prevented by preventing, for example, forced evictions. Much would be gained if all states implementing human rights treaties agree that no one should be evicted into homelessness by banning evictions of any person without having proven access to an alternative accommodation. Collective land rights, including the right to the city, are also not part of the not part of the housing first approach, but which are highly compatible with the human right to housing. In Brazil and other parts of Latin America and beyond, right to the city as a mobilizational framework has been very significant during the last 2 decades. States must ensure that everyone has access to housing affordable to him or her through a combination of social and public housing policies, an adequate regulation of the housing market, and business actors operating in it, especially those who operate in the financial sector. The financialization of housing has turned out to be one of the key factors that undermine the right to adequate housing and produces homelessness. Preventing and eliminating homelessness should therefore be embedded in a comprehensive human rights-based housing strategy at local, regional, and national levels that targets multiple actors. Finally, states must ensure that right to adequate housing can, if necessary, be effectively claimed through judicial and non-judicial mechanisms, including by persons who find themselves in situations of homelessness. Only a few states have so far adopted laws to ensure that this type of access to justice for persons whose right to adequate housing has been violated is actually ensured. I wish you all a very productive and successful meeting and look forward to any questions and comments you may have.
Muchísimas gracias, Balakrishna, por tu presentación, por entregarnos el contexto mundial en esto que creemos que representa un verdadero desafío para todos los países y la forma como hacemos políticas.
Thank you very much for your presentation because it has been very interesting. I wanted to give the floor to next speaker. That is a representative from Portugal. He is the mayor of Braga, Ricardo Rio, mayor of Braga. He is mayor of Braga since 2013. He is the president of the cross-bordering municipal association, is a part of the Immigration Council of the Braga city. And he will talk us about his experience.
Hello, welcome. Thank you for the invitation of the Braga city to present our experience and at the same time to learn with all these projects that are being developed in all Latin America with all the presentations that we already heard that are very interesting. And this is really a priority for the city of Braga, of which I'm president, as you just mentioned, because we believe that this commitment that many times are in all the political positions that we cannot let behind, we need to consider it seriously. We need to make everything that is in our scope in order to make it a reality in our territories. This is my first comment. The first part of any answer related to this need to be from a political commitment. The right to housing is a human right that it was consecrated in human rights. Of course, declaration is a constitutional right in many countries, such as Portugal, for example. And it is also the sustainable development goal, of course, that we are all seeking for. And there is the need that we have a collective commitment of all the communities with the eradication of the homelessness in each territory. I believe that in the first presentation, somebody mentioned the Oporto Summit of the social pillar of the European Union. And in this summit, we presented the request of several mayors and several members of the European Parliamentary that we ask the responsibles of the European Commission that the eradication of homelessness in Europe should be a goal that we should bear in mind to 2030. This is not in the final documents of the summit, but I believe this is a good path because of this request be presented. And apart from that, we need to value the role of the local authorities in each country. We are the first line of response, and we are those who have the major capacity to create a higher transformation in this kind of issues, because in situations in which we are not responsible, even in those cases, all the mayors are trying to develop answers, solutions for the citizens. And when it is about local governments, it's very important as well to create an article between the goals, the planning that we need to perform in order to make this objective true, and also the concrete intervention with the actions that are part of this strategy. That's why in Portugal and in Braga specifically, we have the NPISA, what we call is the core of intervention planning for people, homeless people, or people in shelters, which is a group of work with several partners where we are developing our strategies, and we are monitoring constantly all the outcomes of this strategy in our city. And also on the same page, it is very important to coordinate the local policies with national policies, because it's very important that all the institutions, even those that are very well connected with the central government, can be an active part of all the initiatives that we can develop in that context. Regarding partnerships, this is a very important part because, as I already mentioned, we have this group of work, but we also have constant contact with several institutions that are providing responses in this area. Of course, health institution, social security institution, different security forces, and of course, we have another very important partner in Portugal due to the answers that we have for homeless people specifically, and companies at the local level that are providing housing for people with low income, and as well the charge, specifically the Catholic charge, because in some communities this has a very high influence and capacity to work in several projects that we are developing, because in Portugal, the Catholic Church is a very good partner of several initiatives. When we are talking about the outcomes of all the projects that we are creating and we are working deeply on in order to the citizens should have an active life, a decent life, an autonomous life with being self-sufficient economically, we have several answers for that. We are talking about answers that are directly connected with the housing issue. And of course, we have the model housing first implemented in our city, but we also have some other answers, for example, with a project, experimental project that we are developing right now. And apart from that, shared housing and some other institutional responses more traditional for this issue. But apart from that, we are always working in the integration of homeless people that we are always trying to struggle with and prevent addictions, which is a very common issue in a huge part of this population. And other responses specifically in mental health area, because it's one of the biggest problems in terms of articulation with these people. In Portugal and in Braga, we are members of a European project that I believe is very interesting, which is the Roof Project. The Roof Projects include some initiatives that I believe are very well differentiated in the work with this range of our population. For example, we have Braga Skills Academy. This is a way to try and reinforce the human qualifications, professional qualifications of those citizens, trying to make it easy, the integration in a professional level. And we also have a case administrator, which is kind of a mentor that is following up all the dimensions of each case that has been identified, and that has a responsible person to develop an individual work plan with each one of those citizens, taking into consideration all the dimensions of the specific situation, trying to articulate with our partners and get the best answer, the best solution for each area. And finally, we are also committed with the training and the formation in education, specifically in terms of economics and digitalization, because if we are trying to have autonomous people, they need to have these concepts very clear and being able to have an autonomous life in society. Considering the pandemic situation that we are facing now, one of the most important responses that we created is the implementation of a unit where we can host many people that were homeless one more time together with Red Cross, and we have the capacity to try and decrease the risk for those people of possible infections with the rehabilitation and frequent tests, trying to speed up vaccination processes as well, and providing a situation that is more comfortable, it's more controlled as well for these citizens. And we also need to bear in mind that it's very important to think that the outcomes of all these initiatives are not immediate results, are not immediate outcomes. We always need to have a medium or long-term logic, because several of the situations required a following up from the governments, from the local governments, in order to have success in this process. And finally, I think that Sam and the other speakers already mentioned, the prevention issue is something very important, and we are trying to integrate the fight to the homelessness as something that needs to be in all the management levels of the municipality, when we are talking about the creation of jobs, of employment, when we are talking about social responses, work with the community, in immigrants integration. In all these perspectives, we need to bear in mind that if we are making a good job, we need to avoid this kind of situations, kind of situations where the people that in certain moment of their life are in a situation of vulnerability in the streets. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are trying to do our best, and everything that is under our scope, so they can have a better life and be happy in their cities. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ricardo. We know how important is the role of the mayor and the local government teams in the implementation of this kind of policies, trying to eradicate the homelessness situation. I really appreciate your presentations. And now I want to introduce the Chilean case, and we are going to start this presentation with Luis Jara, who is something that was a homeless some time ago, is here with us. So good afternoon, Luis. We will share your video now. We are sharing the video that you prepared as an inspiration and as a show of what happened since 2 years ago in the program Housing First.
¿Ves? ¿Ya?
Sí,
¿Sí?
Can you see it? Yes.
¿Sí?
Me crié en cuna de oro. Mi papá tuvo una empresa, vine a trabajar a los 40 años. Al llegar a situación calle, lo que gatilló fue la muerte de mi padre. Mis hermanos como que se anduvieron desordenando. Uno de ellos viajó a México. En México conoció a una niña y esta niña era conocida de unos traficantes y metió a mi hermano en la droga. Hasta cuando llegó investigaciones a mi casa, todos quedamos en la calle. La droga destruye y destruyó nuestra familia. Después con el tiempo mi hermana se enfermó de cáncer. Ella era mi apoyo. Y quedé solo. No tenía nada. Solamente la gente que conocí en la calle, las plazas, los amigos. Los cabros consumían droga, empecé a consumir con ellos, tenían un ruco, empecé a quedar con ellos en la calle. No te vas dando cuenta, se te junta el alcohol, la droga, empieza a aumentar la dosis. Estaba yo drogado con un amigo y él se fue a trabajar a las 6:30 de la mañana y se devolvió. Y cuando se devolvió ve mi ruco prendido y si no es por él yo estaría muerto. Eso gatilló a pedir ayuda. Estaba profundamente hundido en la droga, se puede decir, y quería salir de eso. Conocí a dos niñas que estaban un día hablando con un amigo en un negocio. Estas niñas pertenecían a la Fundación Emplea, que pertenece al Hogar de Cristo. Entonces me acerqué a ellas y les pregunté si me podían ayudar. Me hicieron postular al PTA, que es paréntesis, que es un programa para la adicción, que las personas adictas al alcohol, droga. También justo salió este programa de la vivienda con apoyo que se llama. Gracias a Dios que he seleccionado. Al principio fue difícil, porque uno se acostumbra en la calle. Hasta que después ya empecé a llegar, ya me acostumbré de nuevo a estar en una casa. Con este programa puedo andar limpio, puedo dormir en una cama bien, estoy seguro, estoy bajo un techo. Pude hacer un curso de gastronomía. En el curso lo pasé bien, aprendí a poder desarrollarme como persona. Me da las herramientas. Este programa lo que más le agradezco es que uno lo recupera como ser humano. O sea, uno vuelve a tener dignidad, vuelve a creer en uno. Uno tiene de nuevo fe en uno, uno dice, sí puedo hacerlo. O sea, volví a creer en mí. Porque como estoy tan metido en la droga y todo lo demás, uno se pierde. Aquí uno recupera valores. Tengo todo lo que no tenía en la calle. Uno se reintegra a la sociedad. Recuperé de nuevo amigos, volví de nuevo con mi familia a tener lazos. Retomé yo a mi gente, o sea, yo volví a ellos. Uno tiene que tener a alguien que crea en uno. Lo importante es que uno tiene que querer salir. Si tú no querís, no vayas a salir nunca. Y si yo quiero ayudar a mi madre, como es mi meta, tengo que estar yo bien para poder ayudarla a ella. Puedo dar ejemplo a los demás que crean en mí, que vean que sí se puede salir de ahí, del hoyo. Entonces yo creo que puedo dar ahora un ejemplo a los demás, que uno puede salir de la situación calle, puede.
Agradecemos, Luis, por esta confianza.
Thank you, Luis, for the confidence in the program. And now we want to welcome the Secretary of Social Service, Andrea Vagilares. She's going to share the story of the program and the learnings. Welcome. Thank you very much, Karina. And thank you, all of you that are here today, and also the ones who help us organize this webinar, the seminar, specifically the speakers that have a great experience and a great knowledge that is helping us to implement these policies. And first of all, I want to express my apologies because our minister, Carla Rovilar, is now in the parliament with project, and this is the reason why she's not here with us. She was very excited to share our experience, but unfortunately, she has a personal and professional commitment with all this policy that we are developing as a ministry. So first of all, I want to apologize for her. And now I want to share with you the experience in Chile and how we progress and how is also the reality that we have now. Our idea is to share with you the characteristics of the Chilean situation nowadays, the outcomes of our projects, the learnings for Latin America and for our country, and of course, which are the challenges that we will have in the future. There are some things that as ministry and as government we want to share with you because it's our perspective, is that we need to face this policy as a social development and family ministry with a social and integrated perspective. This is not an isolated effort. It needs to be a collective effort from the government and with the civil society. The effort that we are making here should be as a whole so we can face this homelessness and provide a better social policy. Now we will see the characteristics. In Chile, we have more than 16,000 people, homeless people, that are in the streets or go to a shelter, for example, and 16% are women and 44% lives in the capital, in Santiago. We have a very different reality in different points of our country. We are a very, very big country, and we have very different conditions in the north of the country where the climate is hotter, and in the capital, in the central part of our country with low temperatures. And of course, we have a more difficult reality in the south of the country. And in general terms, the homeless people are more or less with an average of 44 years. And 1/3 of these people have been in the streets more than 5 years. 64% of these homeless people work every day, even though they are homeless, and even though the deterioration of their health due to living in the streets. So we are talking about a very, very diverse population with different dynamics, with different realities, and with different origins as well. As I already explained, depending on the region they live and depending on the different types of cities, because in Chile we have very well urbanized cities with high demographic concentration, and we also have rural areas where the reality is quite different. And our social policy started 15 years ago, and it has been strengthened during the Piñera government. In 2021, we will have 13,000 points of attention as housing programs, for example, that are implemented during the coldest month because our winter is very harsh. And apart from that, we have an annual investment of about 26 millions of euros that we invest in different aspects, for example, in partnerships with social organizations that have experience working with homeless, and also with some institutions of the government. And we need to highlight that public policy related to homelessness has a great innovation component, and we made a lot of progress in the design and the implementation of the programs. We need to keep making things as we were, but we need to innovate and share, exchange experiences with different other countries. We need to share with you, of course, how Housing First worked. It was a revolution. It was a huge change on our public policy to face homelessness, and we changed the focus. In the first place, we have the right to a house. We don't have any requirements, any preconditions. The base is that everyone has the right to have a roof, to have a house again. So we are committed to develop a solution to all those people that have been in the streets for several years. Of course, these people are regularly users of the different programs that we have in our network and in the different organizations that work with us, but they are not able to get out of this homelessness situation. That's how we decide on the implementation of this program. We seek for different characteristics, for example, minimum age of 50 years with more than 5 years being homeless. And of course, this is because people with these characteristics require much more intensive support in order to get out of the streets because of the age and also because of the time they have spent on the streets. It's much harder to change some daily dynamics. We are getting international evidence of Housing First, considering the group of people that we look to be a part of this program, Housing First. We prioritize women and people with chronic disease because they are much more vulnerable than the other characteristics that we already defined. And finally, we want these people to be stable in their houses, not coming back to the streets, and we need to see an enhancement in their health, physically and mentally, and we want them to being able to connect once again with the society, with the community, with the neighborhood, and of course with the working force. How are we going to make these people to leave the streets with the Housing First program? One of the policies that we perform as a ministry is to look for a house. We can rent it or repair, renovate a house. Sometimes we have houses for 2 people, and some other times we have houses for 1 people or 3 people. And we need to have the basics in this house, and after that the users will enter the house. But apart from that, we provide some support for the food and the payment of services. Of course, we are not trying to create wages for them in this housing, and apart from that, we have a multidisciplinary team to follow up and help them to integrate in the neighborhood and provide daily support, of course. And after that, after they are already settled in their houses, we have a team that works 24 hours per day, providing support for the beneficiaries with a therapist, a psychologist, and social assistants who are working with the beneficiaries of the program on a daily basis. And of course, the adaptation is one of the first evidence that we have. In the first 90 days, this follow-up process is very, very important in order for them to assume the reality they are part of. Our ministry received some allies to develop this program. Of course, the real estate sector was an ally helping us to find these houses, for example. And we have several measurement tools to measure the results, the outcomes, and of course, we are creating a change in health and social integration of the beneficiaries of this program. We implemented several instruments, several tools, and the support of the program was financed by EUROsociAL program. This allows us to standardize our process and the measurement of some other experiences at an international level, such as Housing First. we have 350 people that have different houses in different regions of the country since the beginnings of 2019, and they are in their houses right now. And as we saw in Luis' testimony, they left the streets and changed their lives deeply. For this year, we have 100 more users. We will reach more or less 230 houses, and we are very happy for the implementation of this program. And apart from that, we need to consider the situation that we faced during 2020 and 2021, because the pandemic situation created a very important effect in the lockdown as well. So this is not only about living the streets and having a roof, but also learn to have the lockdown, the social distancing, that it's another element that makes it harder to transit to a new way of life. So the challenge is bigger now, and we can now say that 90% of the participants of this program are in their houses and didn't come back to the streets. So these outcomes are very, very important for those people who are suffering some chronic disease, because this enhances their quality of life and their health significantly. They didn't receive treatments or didn't have access to health services nowadays, and now having a house and improving their living conditions, they can have access to all these services. Also, many of the people who are in these conditions right now were able to, with the support of the multidisciplinary teams, were able to reconnect with their sons, with the daughters, with their couples, with their parents. And this integration with their familiar network or with their environment is very positive as well. And of course, we need to highlight the high capacity of all the social organizations that we have in Chile to support with creativity and commitment to provide services and follow up these homeless people in transition to their own houses. Of course, the process was very difficult. We made some adjustments, and in some communities, the process were even harder. Sometimes we have some conflicts, but in general terms, the good outcomes of the programs were the majority, and we were able to overcome some problems that we faced. Regarding the evaluation of the program, we have two elements to highlight here in the presentation. One is the analysis of cost and benefits, the cost that the program is for the government. And these people, these homeless people that are the target population of our program, in 2018, when the program Housing First was designed, we performed a research with the economic ministry that showed that the annual cost of homeless people with chronic characteristics was about 16,000 euros in contracts with 7,000 euros, which is the cost of the program that we designed. So this means that we are saving more or less 9,000 euros per participant. And apart from that, after a year of the implementation of the program, the cost of the program is very similar to the cost of a shelter that works 24 hours, 7 days a week. So this is a very viable solution that we can forecast to be sustainable all over the years. And about the learnings, we learned a lot of things. As I comment, the first 90 days are a very huge change, process of adaptation, and we need the presence of the teams providing support for those people that are transitioning from the streets to their house, because this process is hard, but also going from the streets to a house with the lockdown in quarantine is much more complex, and the social organizations needed to develop several strategies to help them adapting this new reality that we are facing now. And of course, the challenge of the motivation of the participants that have their new house now have been very important. Of course, there we have a good job creating the connection of cooking together, listening to music, relating to others, creating a network, and motivating them to be in their houses and not going back to the streets. Of course, the participants itself shared their experience with us, and they said that having a house first allowed a very deep change with a lot of hope for every of them, for each one of them. And of course, they change their living conditions immediately. We also detected that there are a lot of prejudice in Chilean society with the homeless people. And of course, we need a very important commitment with the visibilization of homeless people and what's going on with them. That's why the commitment of Piñera's president government and our government specifically is that to make this situation visible and create more proposals on more programs such as Housing First, trying to reach more beneficiaries. Of course, we'll learn to dialogue with the private sector, for example, the real estate sector, and trying to commit different areas of society so we can reach much more people with this program. Obviously, we need to understand that homelessness is a very deep and very hard situation. People need cares, and during this process, we can make a mistake, but of course, we need to work on these linkages and following up these homeless people. We learn from international experiences, of course, what have been done in other countries, but we also wanted to share with you our experience because, in fact, we saw how this really changed the life of several people and being in their houses nowadays. Of course, the challenges are a lot. Our idea is to maximize the efforts to eradicate homelessness, looking for house solutions for them. And it's very important that all the social policy is sustainable all over the time. We can't lose the programs that we are developing right now. We need to boost and foster the learnings and the possibility of implementing new solutions because, as we mentioned at the beginning, innovation and new spaces are very important because we have different conditions. Nowadays, we have the pandemic situation, but we can have different situations in the future. And of course, we are trying to look for enhancement in public housing with some other programs that are viable. And of course, we want to reproduce this model in other regions, in other areas. We want to reach rural areas as well because we are now working only in urban areas. So this is a very important challenge to broaden this program and this experience, not only in terms of groups, but also in regional and geographical regions. This was our experience. We are very, very happy. Karina is the promoter of this program. And of course, our commitment is to keep going, keep working to increase the Housing First program because we saw the outcomes and how they change people's life. Thank you very much, Andrea, for sharing these learnings, and the authorities were key for this opportunity and also to create a commitment of the president several years ago with the homelessness situation. So I want to especially thank for your participation because I know today is a very busy day in Chile because we are working in a project, and I know her agenda is very tight today. So thank you very much. And now I want to introduce you another important people for Red Calle Latin America, and she's Janela Pocente. During the last years, she was the host and the coordinator of Red Calle. She is the director of International Affairs and Cooperation of Social Development Ministry of Uruguayan government, and she will help us with the Q&A session now. Welcome, Janela. Thank you very much, Karina. I want to congratulate and thank you for all the presentations and these excellent speakers that we had. We have had 2 hours of presentations that are helping us to think and reconsider everything. And I want also to express my gratitude to all the participants that were very active in the different means of communications, but I may say that Luis and this testimony was the most important one because we received a lot of comments and a lot of ratings, and we have a question for him. This is about how it was for you to be during these 2 years in the program and what this experience of living the streets meant to you. And I want to add also that many people shared that the articulation of different teams was very, very important, different organizations in Chile. And I wanted to highlight this comment. I don't know if Luis can turn his mic on. Yes, here he is. Hello, good afternoon. My experience was truly important. It was hard for me, but it was very, very good because I'm a better human, a better man now. After the program, I am very thankful and grateful. This is the only thing that I want to share. I'm very grateful because I was able to leave the streets and being in a house right now. And I also want to thank all the teams because they are always checking on me, mainly now during the pandemic situation. They kept visiting me once a week. They are checking on by phone as well. The only thing I can say is thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Luis. And I also want to comment to share with you that we received a lot of comments that we can summarize in 3 main aspects. One of them is referring to the implementation of the housing first model. Specifically, we have some colleagues that are asking if there is any differentiation in the outcomes for young or for teenagers, considering that the different members of the network are worried about the homelessness in childhood, during the childhood phase, and also elderly people because they have mental illness or also some disabilities, physical disabilities. Other comments are related to the change in the model in different countries and how can we implement this path that Chile started very strongly with the outcomes that the Secretary Andrea just presented since 2018, but they want to know that in the different experiences that the mayor commented, for example, which was the key that allowed the different stakeholders to reach this change to the eradication of the homelessness. And another point for all the speakers, we want to share this comment that we need to see your view, your perspective, know which is your perspective about the moment that Chile is facing now. In Chile, we have a very important, very good opportunity now because we are rewriting our constitution now. And which do you think should be the main principles that should be written in the constitution that will help us to approach the homelessness situation now that we have this opportunity, that we are on time? So I don't know if some maybe wants to answer some of this question, or also Balakrishna.
Can I start to try and answer the question about youth? The program has two components. It has housing and it has services, okay? So housing is more or less the same for everybody. You know, it's safe, decent, affordable. The services have to match. This is one of the principles of the program. The program services have to be designed to match the needs of the people that we're serving. So if, for example, we're serving people who have a lot of physical health problems, medical issues, you would want to have on your team making the home visits a nurse or a physician who makes home visits, who is attending to the problems of the people you serve. You already know who you're serving. If you're serving young people, you need someone on the team who is closer to their age, understands their cultures, their interests. You're going to have someone who is more familiar with the vocational, employment, educational, social needs of younger people, so that if the services are matching the supports, you're going to have very good outcomes on housing stability, no matter who you're housing. The housing stability is 80% for young people, like it is for old people or for people with mental illness or addiction, if you are providing the kinds of support that they need to stay stably housed. I hope that answers your question. I don't know, the constitutional question, I love that question, because I think it is a great opportunity. If you're really going to start with a blank piece of paper and write the dream constitution, I would encourage a kind of a inclusiveness that says that we are a country that believe in taking care of each other, that we all are committed to the values of inclusiveness, human rights, and also of the belief that those of us who have much should pay more than those of us who have little, to have a tax system and an economic system that is just and equitable, because that's where social justice is going to come from. It's going to come from economic justice. You're going to have the human values, rights to housing, rights to education, rights to healthcare, and then a structure that provides a tax base and an economic base to make those possible.
Muchas gracias, Sam.
Thank you very much, Sam. Yes, you are right. It is a milestone, a historical milestone, this that Chile has with this new constitution. And before giving the floor to Balakrishna to answer these questions, I will add another question that comes from Brazil. How do you think that housing first model could be a solution based on human rights for people, homeless people, when we are in a lack of housing in our Latin American countries? You mentioned already that in your presentation, that it's important to start with these steps, but maybe we can focus this reflection to our regional context and to our characteristics itself. Go ahead.
Well, housing, there's a housing shortage everywhere, okay? And I think that what we have is an economic system that has created a real estate business that is one of the biggest businesses in the world. Globally, real estate is, you know, second or third as a business. And it's a big investment for people to buy a home, the value increases and so on. So many of us on this call are benefiting from the housing, real estate investment. But we have to recognize that this model of only thinking about housing as a commodity and a market value without including a vision for social housing and supported housing, we will never end homelessness unless we have a policy level commitment to building enough subsidized, affordable housing, also paying for rent subsidies for populations that are at risk. So preventing people from falling into homelessness already as cities continue to become gentrified, and housing is, affordable housing is lost. So it has to be in the context of a much larger housing policy issue. All Housing First does is it demonstrates that everybody, old, young, sick, not sick, everyone can be housed. So there's no excuse for not housing everyone. We know we can do it. The challenge to take it to scale is a political challenge. Like the mayor said from Brada, that you got to start with the political commitment, because that's where the solution scales to actually do it.
Muchas gracias, Sam.
Thank you very much, Sam. Now, Balakrishna, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I think, that it is a very important moment in Chile, of course, the first time since the 70s that you have a chance to rewrite the constitution now. And I know how engaging it has been for civil society in general in Chile. And from my point of view, I, along with the other special rapporteurs, actually strongly supported the effort by civil society groups in Chile and others to include the right to adequate housing in the new Chilean constitution, I believe Article 7B. And that, of course, is a very essential first step. If you want to protect housing as a human right, you have to protect it as a constitutional value. One of the biggest barriers that we have in some of the advanced economies, including the one that I live in the United States, is that because the United States constitutional compact still remains kind of beholden to its history so much. It's so hard to change the American Constitution. Unlike, for example, constitutional changes in many other countries, it's very hard to introduce new elements like right to housing into the US constitutional system as a matter of federal constitutional law. But Chile has a great opportunity because you're not stuck with such factors, and you have an opportunity to reinvent. And many countries have reinvented their constitutional traditions, especially when critical moments come when there is a political window of opportunity to reinvent yourself as a new society, as it seems to be the case in Chile right now. The timing is right. So it's certainly an important moment where such a step can be taken. But of course, what it also, what I must also caution is that if you look at the history of countries which actually did end up introducing right to housing as a constitutional value, primarily among them South Africa, in the 90s, the experience is not very promising either, in the sense that they've not been able to radically transform the challenges of addressing housing as a human right, including resolving issues of homelessness or people living in insecure housing, including in informal settlements. Informal settlements are increased in number, for example, and landlessness continues to be a key issue in South Africa. And a lot of it goes to, and I agree with Sam, that a lot of it goes with the kind of economic and social system that the constitutional order is defending. On the one hand, the constitutional order is about defining the rights of citizens. And sometimes it's very important, but sometimes we over-focus only on those. And we forget that the rights can be realized only if there is an enabling environment in a social and economic sense. And if the social and economic systems are designed to be backward-looking, to benefit only a few at the expense of the many, then you can have all the rights listed in the Constitution that looks very promising, but it won't get implemented, in practice. At least it won't get implemented in time. So political frustration will start building up and people will start losing faith in the constitutional compact over time. And unfortunately, I hope that doesn't happen. And a critical issue here that I hope Chile tackles together with the right to housing is the question of the right to property. If you don't get the definition and the limits on the right to property correctly and balance it, with both the private benefits that grow out of property rights, of course, but balance it with the public sort of dimensions that are necessary for constraining the right to property. Eventually, the right to housing becomes frustrated by the right to property. And we saw that happen in the South African case. We have seen it happen in the Brazilian case, where the question of property rights has been overwhelming and difficult to sort of move around in the struggles to establish a right to housing, including, as I mentioned in my remarks, the right to the city movement, which actually picked up momentum quite significantly during the 2000s, during the administration of President Lula da Silva. And but even with the efforts made during that time, it became extremely difficult to work around the inherited structures of inequality and the very hard notion of property rights that prevailed in Brazil. Despite many progressive elements being introduced into the Brazilian constitution and the legal system. So the law and the constitutional change is a critical first step, but we shouldn't equate the changes in the law and the constitution as being the only way to get at where we want to go. Many other supporting things have to be changed as well.
Excelente. Muchas gracias.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Without any doubts, we are observing a lot of progress during this last year. And of course, the event today, this webinar showing the outcomes of the progress we are making in Chile and Brazil, in Uruguay as well. But of course, we have a huge path in front of us, and the impact of the pandemic situation accelerated to speed up a lot of these processes. But of course, we have a long way to walk, and I want to ask less consideration, more like a recommendation specifically to Chile, but all the Latin American countries as well, focus on the prevention, something that the Mayor of Braga mentioned early, that even though this should be something transversal, which are the first steps that we need to take so we can implement this, we can put it into practice. So I just want a last consideration and last recommendation from you. And of course, I want to thank for the opportunity and for being here with us. Go ahead, Sam.
Sorry. I'm sorry, I missed that question.
Una reflexión final para todo el evento.
I just want a final comment, a final recommendation at the end of the event.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry. Well, I mean, it was an amazing event. There were so many points of view and different ways to focus on this issue. And yet I want to congratulate the organizers, because there was such a consistency to all of the messages, from the international perspective of UN human rights to people from the streets who had experienced the program and everybody in between. I just want to say that for me, it's a very hopeful sign to see so many people attending and focusing on this issue, that it gives me great faith in the future. And I do want to celebrate this incredible moment in Chile where there is this enormous opportunity to set a new standard, not only for Chile, but for the rest of South America. So I wish you all very good luck with that, and thank you so much for including me.
I could just add that I endorse this very much. I echo the comments that have been made. I think it was a very successful event, given the number of participants and the active engagement that I see in the chat box. It's been a very productive 2 hours, and I really wish all the organizers the very best going forward. As I said, it's a very important moment for Chile and for Latin America, particularly given the challenges and the incredible barriers exposed by the pandemic, and which is not yet over, and it's working its way through. And I really hope that the right lessons are learned from this pandemic, and there is a recommitment to a new social compact among Latin American countries to reinforce the rights of people as being the principal criterion for organizing their governance around a range of different dimensions. And housing, of course, is a critical dimension, which is going to be at the top of any such agenda. So good luck again. Thank you very much.
Ustedes.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Yanela.
Thank you, Shanela. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Balakrishna. As a conclusion of this event, I think it's very important to share that first of all, for us,
Yanela, dame un segundo.
Janela, please give me a second. I am having technical issues here. Okay, no problem. I know that you're having a busy day today. I'm sorry, just a second.
Aprovechamos para agradecer a todos la activa participación.
Thank you very much for your active participation. And maybe now Karina can proceed to the closure. Janela, can you listen to me? Yes, Rocio, I can listen to you. Thank you very much. I will be here making the closure in the place of Karina, and I want to thank you for being present here in this webinar. Thank you very much, Krishna. Thank you, Institute Global of Homelessness. Thank you, Sam Sunberries, of course, and of course, all the organizations that are here from Brazil, from Colombia, Ecuador, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay that took part here in this webinar. And we want to finish this event with three main ideas. We think that here in Chile and in Latin America, it's important to end up the homelessness, and this is possible. And with a few houses we started and with few homeless people, but now we are thinking on 1,000 people that we will reach with our program Housing First. So we do believe that this is possible, and we do believe that we are able to eradicate homelessness in Chile and in Latin America. We do think it's a global phenomenon, so we are working as a network, and we want to continue like that. We know this is a task that involves everyone, and We are working together with the authorities and the governments and different other stakeholders in the civil society and the business sector as well, because it's necessary to be all on the same page and reach this objective, this goal. It's a task that involves everyone. And at the end, I want to make this point very clear, because we all know this is a new program in Chile. This was a pilot project at the beginning, but this is not a project anymore. It's a serious program. And we are making our best efforts so that housing first should be a long-term policy in Chile, a policy from the government, but also in all the regions. We want to assure that in Latin America, we can share our progress with the houses as a solution for homeless people. Ideally, I will share a new report with Balakrishna to report, hopefully, that we were able to beneficiate more homeless people with houses, not only with shelters, but with long-term solutions. So this is our final goal, and this is our together, and we want to invite you to keep working on this. We will keep sharing our documents in social media. You can all follow up in Red Lex social media. This session will be saved, the recording will be in the European website, and we also have the Red Calle Latin America website, and all the documents, all the recordings will be there as well. If you need a participation certificate, you can ask it by email as well. That's it for today, and this is the end of this webinar. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. And good afternoon in the other countries. Thank you very much for being here. See you soon.